Welcome to African American History Lesson 61. In this video, we will explore Black religious nationalism and the Black Power movement. What happens when the demand is no longer for inclusion, but for independence, self-determination, and control of one's destiny? In the late 1960s, the Black freedom struggle evolved from calls for civil rights to a louder, more radical assertion: Black power. As the civil rights movement faced mounting resistance and internal limitations, a new wave of political and cultural activism emerged, led by voices that called not only for justice, but for self-determination. This shift was deeply informed by Black religious nationalism, particularly the teachings of the Nation of Islam, which offered a powerful critique of white supremacy while promoting racial pride, economic independence, and spiritual renewal. Leaders such as Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X challenged the moral and political assumptions of integration and encouraged African Americans to reclaim control over their communities, institutions, and identities. The emergence of the Black Power movement in the mid to late 1960s reflected this broader ideological transition. Advocates of Black power, many of whom had roots in civil rights activism, called for political sovereignty, cultural affirmation, and resistance by any means necessary. This movement reshaped the landscape of Black activism by centering Black consciousness, celebrating African heritage, and rejecting narratives that cast nonviolence as the only legitimate form of resistance. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad led the Nation of Islam from 1934 until his death in 1975, establishing its national headquarters in Chicago and growing its influence across the United States. Under his guidance, the Nation of Islam encouraged followers to reject their slave names and reclaim their identities through Islamic naming practices. Many members adopted the letter X to symbolize the lost names of their ancestors, an act of resistance against the legacy of enslavement and an assertion of autonomy. This symbolic renaming represented a deeper ideological shift, a break from assimilation and a commitment to cultural and spiritual sovereignty. This 1965 photograph, taken in Chicago, captures the members of the Nation of Islam distributing bundles of Muhammad Speaks, the official newspaper of the organization. Published from its Chicago headquarters under the leadership of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, the newspaper served as both a communication tool and an ideological platform for the Nation of Islam's teachings. It featured content on racial injustice, international Black solidarity, economic self-sufficiency, and critiques of integrationist politics, offering a worldview grounded in Black nationalism and religious conviction. The image documents the grassroots efforts of the Nation of Islam members, who not only distributed literature, but also embodied the movement's discipline, self-reliance, and community outreach. By selling Muhammad Speaks in urban neighborhoods across the country, these individuals extended the Nation of Islam's influence beyond religious spaces and into the public square, reaching everyday African Americans with a message of dignity, resistance, and transformation. This 1966 photograph captures Elijah Muhammad, the longtime leader of the Nation of Islam, delivering an address to a congregation of Black Muslims in Chicago. As the central figure of the Nation of Islam since 1934, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad played a formative role in shaping the organization's message of Black self-reliance, religious discipline, and separation from white-dominated institutions. Speaking from the movement's national headquarters, Muhammad's leadership in this image reflects both spiritual and ideological clarity during a period of growing national attention to Black religious nationalism. The photograph underscores the Nation of Islam's structured hierarchy, formal presentation, and mass appeal during the height of the Black Power era. Gatherings like this served not only as religious events, but also as forums for disseminating the Nation of Islam's vision of Black identity, autonomy, and moral reform. By the mid-1960s, a growing number of African Americans began to question the efficacy and limits of the civil rights movement's emphasis on integration and nonviolence. In response to ongoing violence, economic inequality, and systemic neglect, the Black Power movement emerged as a new ideological and strategic phase of the Black freedom struggle. Advocates of Black Power promoted self-determination, community control, and the right to self-defense. The movement also emphasized the transformation of Black consciousness, encouraging pride in African heritage, political independence, and cultural expression that rejected white normative standards. This historic photograph, taken after a press conference, captures a brief but symbolic moment between two of the most prominent figures of the Black freedom movement, Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Taken at the United States Capitol in 1964, following a Senate debate on the Civil Rights Act, this image marks the only documented meeting between the two leaders. Although their strategies differed, King advocated nonviolent civil disobedience, and Malcolm X emphasized Black autonomy and self-defense. Both were deeply committed to securing dignity, justice, and full citizenship for African Americans. The photograph serves as a visual testament to the ideological breadth and complexity of the movement. It reminds scholars that although these leaders sometimes disagreed publicly, they were ultimately united in their pursuit of liberation. The convergence of their paths in this moment underscores the historical urgency of 1964 and the growing national and global pressure to confront racial injustice in the United States. Unlike other civil rights leaders who promoted nonviolence as a moral and strategic imperative, Malcolm X asserted the right of African Americans to defend themselves by any means necessary. He argued that if the government failed to protect Black citizens from racial terror, Black citizens themselves had both the moral and constitutional right to defend their lives and property. This position resonated with many African Americans living under daily threat of violence. It also directly influenced later groups like the Black Panther Party, which explicitly embraced the principle of armed self-defense and community protection. Delivered in April 1964, shortly after his departure from the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X's speech, "The Ballot or the Bullet," marks a pivotal moment in the Black freedom struggle. In this address, Malcolm X urged African Americans to exercise their right to vote judiciously, emphasizing that political engagement was essential for achieving racial justice. He cautioned, however, that if the government continued to deny African Americans full equality, more assertive measures might become necessary. Malcolm X highlighted the importance of Black political unity and self-determination. He criticized both major political parties for failing to address the needs of Black Americans and advocated for the establishment of independent Black political organizations. The speech underscored the urgency of the moment, suggesting that 1964 was a critical year for African Americans to leverage their voting power effectively. This speech is significant for its articulation of Black nationalism and its emphasis on the right to self-defense. Malcolm X's rhetoric empowered African Americans to take control of their political destiny and challenge the status quo of racial oppression. To hear the full speech, click on the link in the description. Malcolm X's thinking evolved significantly in the final years of his life. After leaving the Nation of Islam in 1964 and embracing Orthodox Islam, he began to advocate for a global human rights agenda that connected the struggles of African Americans with those of oppressed people around the world. He supported Pan-African solidarity, denounced colonialism, and sought to bring international pressure to bear on U.S. racial policies. In doing so, Malcolm reframed the Black freedom movement not only as a fight for civil rights, but as part of a worldwide campaign for human dignity and justice. Black religious nationalism and the rise of the Black Power movement marked a pivotal shift in the Black freedom struggle. The Nation of Islam, under the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, offered a theological and cultural framework that emphasized pride, discipline, and separation from oppressive systems. Through figures like Malcolm X, this ideology helped catalyze a broader movement rooted in self-determination, autonomy, and an uncompromising demand for dignity. As the limitations of integration became increasingly visible, Black Power emerged as both a political and cultural response, reshaping how African Americans defined liberation, challenged white supremacy, and envisioned their future in the United States and beyond.